Welcome to another episode of the BS Podcast, the show that looks at how behavioural change insights are being applied in the wild. Episodes feature renowned behavioural experts across industries and organisations, from management and marketing to policy and public health, and more. Let's dive in and see what all the BS is about. Here's your host from The Behaviourist, Nick Hobson.
Hello, BS listeners, and welcome back to the show. Today's episode is part of the new spin-off series of what I call the BS Buzz, where the focus is on cutting-edge new products and services that are behavioral-based, behavioral-inspired, and designed, developed, created with behavioral science and psychology in mind. Today's BS Buzz is featuring Emotive Technologies and one of its co-founding partners, Nick Bond. So, as a way of bios and intros, Emotive Technologies is a technology-based research company that in just over 2 years has quickly mobilized to develop Apex, a world-class SaaS-based scoring capability to help brands understand and navigate changing business landscapes and audience expectations. Collaborating alongside some of the brightest minds in academia and working with some of the most well-known brands, Emotive defines, tracks, and helps strengthen audience engagement for organizations across various industries. And Nick Bond. Nick has made a career understanding people. After graduating from the University of Calgary, Nick decided to focus his energy on the data and analytics side of the industry. Earning his stripes for the first 7 years of his career in market research with Ipsos, Nick moved to FGL Sports, part of the Canadian Tire Group, to take a leadership role on the strategic marketing planning team on behalf of well-known brands such as Sport Chek, Atmosphere, and Sports Experts in Quebec. After 5 years, Nick was lured to the agency world and began his foundational work on defining, measuring, and tracking audience engagement. Now, an entrepreneur delivering marketing strategy and insights to businesses across industries for the past 4 years, Nick, along with a strong team of partners, became one of the founding partners of Emotive Technologies, as I said, an audience engagement firm helping brands understand the strengths of the relationships they build with people who really matter, the customers, the employees, other key stakeholders. Having developed a proprietary methodology, the Apex scoring system helps clients quantify and build audience engagement. Emotive is anything but typical. And I am excited that Nick is able to join us today. Nick, welcome to the show.
Great to be here, Nick. Thank you.
Yeah. So let's get the first thing out of the way. I think this is the very first episode where we have two Nicks together in the same room. So it's going to be a good one.
You can never have too many.
In
my experience, you can never have too many.
So Nick and Nick, and the other reason why this is a particularly special episode is because me, Nick Hobson here, I am involved with Emotive, and I am working with Nick Bond and the other really incredible managing and founding partners. So I've been working with Emotive and Nick and team for the last 6 or 7 months, and so this is formally announcing our relationship in a way, almost like a person does with Facebook.
Yeah, it's no longer complicated. We are in a relationship. And
everyone knows it.
And everyone knows it. And you know what? I'm going to scream it from the mountaintops. We are we're excited to have you on the team, Mr. Hobson. I think your contributions so far have been really, really fascinating, and I can't wait to keep going. So yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Well, thanks for welcoming in with open arms, and we'll get to that point in the story of how I got involved. Although this isn't really about me, but I'm sure we'll cover that piece to the puzzle. But there was an interesting first 2 months where we didn't really know how to refer to the Nicks. So was it Dr. Hobbs and Nick, or was it Dr. Hobson and Nick Bond? And I think what we've settled, and it took only 6 months, is that I am Hobbs because my last name is Hobson, and Nick Bond is OG Nick.
The OG, yeah.
OG.
I don't think anybody really asked you, how do you feel about Hobbs? I don't know. This is, it's not your name. We just sort of started calling you that.
But I think there's a Seinfeld episode on that where it's like it's not up to you to come up with your own nickname. You can't be. I think George wanted to be called T-Bone or something like that, and they're like, you can't. That's part of the rule, the social convention of acquiring a nickname is it's bestowed to you as opposed to,
it is. You're allowed to hate it, but you can't really comment on whether or not it gets used. That is true.
That's right. And I don't hate Hobbes. I
That's
actually,
good.
I
That's
actually
good.
like it because Calvin and Hobbes.
Well,
Is
I'm a
kind of,
huge Calvin and Hobbes fan myself, so
well, there you go.
yeah.
There you go. Okay. Well, listeners probably don't give two shits about our names, that we share the same name. So let's move on, shall we? When I spoke with Nick and Mark, Whitehead is the other partner as part of Emotive and Apex, I was instantly hooked, if you will. And so I'm curious to hear from, again, that story, but telling our listeners, what is Emotive and Apex, and what's the story behind it over the last 2+ years, and how did you get to this point where we are right now?
Yeah, no, it's been a journey, and Emotive in its current iteration has existed, yes, for a little over 2 years. The ideas behind it have existed for years, way beyond that. I would say the emotive side of the story started more so with our friend Mark, who's been in the agency world, and you had just referred to him. And he spent a long time sort of working through this idea of what happens when an ad agency becomes something more like an engagement agency, an agency that helps brands build better relationships with their audiences, whether they're internal audiences, external audiences, association members, or whichever. My story is a bit tangential to that. As you said in your bio, I was coming more from the market research side of the world, really digging into the data and analytics side. I really find the idea of understanding people fascinating, more so even as predicting how certain attitudes are going to starting to lead to certain behaviors and how we get to the bottom of that. So I took that from Ipsos. I obviously took that, as you mentioned, into the retail world with the Canadian Tire Group for 5 years or so. And then I got to talking through a back channel with Mark. He was connected to us through a mutual friend, Nathan. And we hit it off pretty quickly because Mark had been spending all this time trying to build out what is this thing called an engagement agency, and asking the question, though, how do we sell ourselves as an engagement agency if we don't have a way to measure engagement? How do you know you're being successful at deepening this thing called engagement if we can't actually track it or analyze it in any way? So Mark and I got to talking. I told him my background and my interest in the subject matter, and he brought me on board as the VP of strategy at the time at that agency, Caro, to come up with that, to come up with the method by which we do some of that thinking. That evolved. We actually both spun out and decided that we would like to take this a different direction and really focus more on the algorithm and the tech side of it, and how can we really make this score the centerpiece of it rather than the more agency centric work that would that may come on the far end of understanding engagement. We wanted to get upstream of the conversation on engagement, so we got together with a couple other partners, Todd and Jordan, who you know, and started ideating. What does it look like if we are a company that is a technology-based company, but rooted in the idea of building better human connections, of how we define relationships between individuals in a systematic way that is repeatable, that we can make very accessible to the whole world, as the gold standard measure of how strong is this relationship, how engaged is my audience. So we took a few different tacks with it, but really at the end of the day, we ended up with what is now known as Apex, the Apex scoring system. And that tool is really, after years and years and years of working on this and working alongside folks like yourself and getting a lot of feedback from industry and feedback from academia, and what is the foundation of engagement and to what extent is it, rational and emotional and behavior driven, and how do those elements sort of play together to work? And then how do you actually take all that? You can speak to this better than I can, but the years of complex academic thinking and boil it down into a couple of survey questions that somebody can toss into any study and make it still accessible, make it not a beast that people have to kind of figure out or be PhDs themselves to understand. So that's been the piece, is how we take this hard academic thinking turn it into something that is simple enough that it can be usable and applicable across industries and audience types. So I think we've hit it. We did hit a point where we needed to bring someone smarter than us into the room, and hence you're in the room now. So thank you. When we start getting some really interesting questions around what does that mean for internal audiences, and how are they different, and how are they the same? Importantly, how do we leverage what we have, or how do we maybe think about needing to create new ideas or products? But at the end of the day, it is really all about making better human connections, and we believe that, you know, the well-being of a customer and the well-being of a brand is not a zero-sum game. Everybody can win if we understand what everybody's looking for. And that's the piece we want to do. We just want to bring mutual understanding between organizations and their audiences. And I think we're on the right track. I mean, you're here, so that's a good sign.
Hey,
you drank the Kool-Aid, and you're a smart fellow, so that no, we can't be totally off.
you guys are
base.
a very convincing bunch. I will just say that. A very an amazing bunch of people, and that obviously paired with what I think is truly an amazing product, an amazing offering. And I've never really actually thought about that, although I probably should, that it is a technology, so it's obviously like putting forward, you know, emphasizing the scalability and automating a lot of these procedures, but at the same time doing it so that we can understand and comprehend human connection. And as Mark always says, you know, bringing the harmony between people. So my listeners, a lot of them will be probably scientists or working in the applied psychology, behavioral science field, and any good scientist will always sort of pause when we hear a central term being used and thrown around. So in this case, the one that we are obviously using readily in the conversation is engagement. And so when I started having conversations with you guys, that was the first thing that came to mind for me, is like, what is that? And it's just one of those terms that we take for granted. It's kind of like the fish in water phenomenon, where we talk about it, we use it so frequently, it's part of our you know, just daily conversation with different people and parties. But if we were to take a step back and sort of write out an actual definition of engagement, I'm curious, what do you think it is? What is engagement according to us and according to you?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and that usually takes up the first few minutes of every meeting we end up in. I'll tell you what it's not first. It's not somebody liking your social media post. It's not somebody even clicking on your ad. I know that digital companies use the word engagement, say these are engaged, and those are important things to measure. But when we talk about engagement, it is much deeper than that. It is all of the things that precede those behaviors. So what we say is it's based on the premise that attitudes, feelings, and more rational oriented beliefs drive behavior. So if we believe that, then engagement then is the extent to which positive attitudes drive positive behaviors. So I'm feeling positively. I believe you're, you know, a dependable organization. I believe you have my back. You respect me. I believe there's empathy here. Also, on a more rational side, you know, I believe that you have good customer service, and you're affordable, and you know, I get the same sort of experience every time, which I like. Those are a bunch of good positive attitudes, and those are now driving positive behaviors. I'm advocating for you. I intend to use you next time I need to go out and get, you know, XYZ product or service. So it's the extent to which positive attitudes are driving positive behaviors means you have more positive engagement. And that's the simplest way to boil it down. And so what Apex does is it is basically codified 16 attitudes, 8 rational, 8 more emotional, and a couple of behaviors that transcend different industries and categories. And we append a score to that. And the bigger that score is, the more engaged. So again, the more positive those attitudes, the more likely those behaviors are going to happen, would be higher engagement. So again, positive attitudes driving positive behaviors is higher engagement. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Does that make sense? That's the clearest way that we tend to say it. And that usually people don't tend to have too much trouble with that, but
yeah, absolutely. And so let's compare it to, I'm going to use a really nasty word here, NPS.
Yeah.
3 words.
Yeah.
Net Promoter Score, which listeners have probably heard before because it's so commonplace and used in. I think I was actually looking at it. It was originally coined in like only 2004,
Yeah.
which I thought it would be before that. Apparently, it was a Harvard Business Review, a piece, like a publication, and I think a market researcher or maybe even an academic was the guy to use NPS for the first time. So, what, for those who don't know, what is NPS, and how does Apex, as that first offering out of Emotive, how does that compare to NPS?
Yeah, that was the first thing we looked at when you started thinking, okay, what does measuring engagement look like? That's the one. I mean, if you're in market research, or if you're a marketer, or if you go to NPS, the Net Promoter Score. This is basically that question you get after you do if you get off your flight and you get the email that says, how's your experience? And it says, on a 0 to 10 scale, how likely are you to recommend Air Canada, United Airlines, whichever, to a friend or family member? It is that one question. And everybody asks it. It doesn't matter what industry you're in. It doesn't matter what you just purchased. It doesn't matter how you just engaged. You just get, and they start to look at it now to be different touch points. So based on your interaction with the client service representative, how likely are you to recommend this organization? So it gets used everywhere because it's based on this premise that advocacy, this idea of recommendation, is inherently linked to growth and is inherently linked to good things for an organization. And growth, from a revenue perspective and from a share price perspective. And, there are a lot of cases where advocacy on its own is not the best measure of growth. And they have done a lot of studies around NPS and is it actually what we think it is? But there's a lot of research that actually supports it and says, the more people that are advocating for an organization, that is a good thing. That does show a finger in the wind level of engagement. So we don't hate the idea of advocacy. And in fact, we include advocacy as one of our core tenets of behavior intention when we look towards the Apex score. What it doesn't do, though, is tell you why or how. It doesn't tell you why people are giving you that score and their intent to advocate. And it doesn't tell you how to improve on that score then. So, okay, my NPS is a 42. Next month, it's a 43. Why is that significant? Is it a change? Do I need to do something about it? Even if I want to do something about it, what do I do? And so that's why they start attaching it to all these different touch points along a journey map, for example. They include an open-ended question that says, why did you give it that score on a 0 to 10 scale? But you're a smart fellow in the behavioral sciences. People have a really hard time verbalizing emotions and why they feel certain ways. And so you end up with a lot of red herring responses to those types of open-ended questions. They can lead you a bit down a rabbit hole that might not be all that helpful for you at the end of the day. So again, we like it because it's simple. And we said, okay, if Apex is going to succeed and, hopefully one day be used more than NPS because it's a better measure, it has to at least be simple because I think simple wins. So we created something simple. But now we're able to answer all those layers. Why is my score my score? What is driving it? What can I do to improve it? And to what extent is this actually even going to help driving real business results? So those are all the pieces that NPS sort of struggles with, and that's what we wanted to address. But we always say if you like NPS, you'll love Apex. Like if you're already there with a simple way to measure engagement, then you're going to be really into this because it does all those things that NPS can't really do that well.
Yeah, and I think that's the most attractive. There's a lot of attractive features of Apex, but I think the one above all is that like you said, it looks at the why.
Yeah.
And it does this full on, I almost think of it as like a diagnostic of what are today these 16 elements, which are these upstream indicators, or for the scientists tuning in, they are the independent variables which predict, or the indicator variables which predict a key outcome variable, which is some sort of behavior or an intent to behave. And in this case can be advocacy.
Yeah.
But if you are, those who are using the NPS or a fan, a proponent of NPS, and you're just measuring the dependent variable, the outcome variable, but you have no idea why it's changing, why it looks the way it is, or why it perhaps is changing up an upwards or a downwards direction, well, then all you're left with is speculation and guessing. And of course, that's never good for any business. and for any business stakeholder, because then it's just a big question mark in a black box, and that's not a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
I love the 16 elements idea. I love how they serve as these upstream indicators. And I was thinking about this the other day, yesterday, and I was going to message the group, but I haven't yet. So let's just talk about it now because I'm talking to you right here. It's almost akin to a doctor trying to find your health, like your overall health. And what do we do? We go to a doctor and we typically get a physical, like, a yearly physical, maybe some screening tests and maybe some blood work. And really what the physician is trying to do is sort of give you this overall score, if you will, of health. And like maybe it's the body's engagement score of health. And then you can sort of really dissect and look at every individual thing. Is it low iron? Is it low testosterone? Is it high blood pressure? Like these indicators which are predicting this health score.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the way that I was kind of thinking of Apex. Is it's this really, even though it's short and it's exactly as long as it needs to be
Mm.
to reveal the the possible pain points in an organization or a brand's engagement. So what do you think of that analogy? Can we use that as physicians who's prodding and checking every possible orifice? Apex does that too, right?
Well, right in our product, we use the word diagnosis, so we're kind of stealing medical terms, anyways, because that's what we're doing. I mean, at the end of the day, engagement is an outcome. It's a symptom of a whole bunch of other things happening when in a relationship. So if you think of it that way, it is absolutely as you're describing. What does my iron deficiency mean for my overall health, and is that a key concern I need to worry myself with, or is this weird thing on the back of my neck a bigger deal that I need to focus on tomorrow? Like, what's the urgent thing? And
Yes.
so I think what we end up with is a little bit of a picture of health, and brand health. It's a word that we use all the time, right? Brand health.
I didn't even think of that.
We get a picture of a brand's health and says, okay, what are the things today that are the 911 things you need to concern yourself with? What are the things that are actually contributing to your very good health? Maybe you have low blood pressure and you have, low stress, and you exercise a lot and you eat well, and all those things are contributing to it. Well, maybe for a brand, it's their overall sense of innovation or community involvement, or the things they're doing that people love. Like, don't mess that up. Whatever you do to fix your or deepen engagement, don't mess those things up. So exactly what you're saying. It's a picture. And one of the things that, again, other brand health metrics don't do so well is you can track things like trustworthiness or affordability or all these. Anybody tracks these things. And you say, okay, well, we're slipping in people believing that we're an empathetic company, so we need to do work around that. Fine. But what we show is, like, is that actually important? Is that a critical piece of this relationship, though? Are they expecting this of you, Mr., Mrs., whatever, low cost retailer? Or do they just want a bunch of good variety stuff at a low price, and they don't really care about anything else from you? They're not looking for some sense of emotional attachment. Because at the end of the day, what we're finding, which is super interesting, is that for some brands in some categories, marketers love this idea of create emotional connection. Hey, and there's something there. It creates some stickiness. But for certain brands in certain categories, that is just not what people are looking for. And we have unearthed a number of situations where that is the case. They don't want all that other stuff. What they're really looking for, give me what you're selling. Give me the nuts and bolts, make it convenient, make it cheap, make it easy, and I will be there for life. So understanding who you are and what role you play in the audience's life and in the industry you're talking about is so critical. And that's what I think we can give. We can give you how important those elements are and how the importance of those elements actually changes. Attitudes do change, right? So one of the things we're seeing through 2020, obviously this is what a messed up year. The importance of certain elements is actually changing dramatically. We saw in 2019, when we were doing all this analysis, we have one element called joyful. The extent to which doing business or interacting with an organization puts a smile on your face. It was honestly kind of lower third in terms of importance through most of that year. And everybody wanted trustworthy, and everybody wanted dependability, and all those normal things. All of a sudden, 2020 happens. We do a study in May, so kind of we're at the depths of this thing. Joy is like the number one thing across so many industries for so many brands. If people just want to, they want a reason to smile. They want the brands they're interacting with to make it an enjoyable experience.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't recognize that, if you're somehow blinded to that and you still think it's about affordability, or you still think it's about predictability in the experience, and you're totally missing this idea that how do I just make people smile? How do I make this a good, happy experience? You're missing a lot of opportunity for engagement because the context has changed. So your audience's expectations have changed, and it's incumbent on brands to recognize that and adapt as well. Some have done very well, some not so much. And I think we're starting to see how that's playing out a little bit.
And if it was done, if there was, if Apex didn't exist, and say that retailer or that organization, that brand was just using NPS and maybe some other tool, but that was sort of similar in terms of its surface level investigation.
Sure.
They wouldn't catch that, and they wouldn't have guessed it either, because like a lot of these results are going to be counterintuitive and non-obvious. So without the tool like Apex, or without Apex itself, you're not going to be aware of that. It's just not going to be brought to your attention. Almost as if God forbid, what a terrible macabre example I'm going to use. you go into a doctor and you have something wrong with you that's under the surface. You need to have that clear, that precise diagnosis or diagnostic test to find that out. It's a similar. I think the analogy continues in that way, right?
Yeah. Just because you're in pain doesn't mean you know how to fix it. You need the answers, you need the game plan, and you need to go do it. Because the other thing it rolls out is once you know those elements, you know what's happening. I'll keep the medical thing going because this is fun. Your treatment options are actually quite varied. Customer service can mean a lot of things, but it might not just be about your call center. It might be about your website or your chat, or just how you interact on a daily basis with individuals, and how those different things play together actually mean that there are people from operations, there are people from marketing, there are people from service, there's people from product, all in the room to come up with how do we create a better, more predictable experience, if that's what we're going for, or a more forward-thinking, innovative experience, or a more joyful experience. Bring that one back. Like it becomes an entire organization level of thinking when you really get to the depths of understanding what's going on and the issues, and that's the fun part. I mean, that's where people can really flex their muscles and be the experts in their particular roles and jobs, and try new and different things, but all in the name of audience centricity and being the best they can be for the audience at hand. I mean,
and that.
Go ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to say the really fun project that I'm working on recently is taking each of those 16 elements and going into the scientific literature of psychology, behavioral neurosciences, and saying joy. This is one example we sort of continue to use. What is joy? What do we know about the psychology of joy? And how do we move it? What are the levers that we need to pull on to actually see that particular attitude or belief or affective state be affected within an individual, or in this case, a group of individuals? So that lends itself to those listeners, of course, who are probably aware of this, like any sort of quick little randomized control trial or intervention where the key target in this case that we're actually trying to move is that one thing, i.e. joy, and let's leave the other 15 to the side right now because they're not the real issue. That the diagnostic Apex score tells us those 15 are okay, but joy is really, really in a bad place. It's in the red zone. So let's move it. Oh, we need to move this number of percentage points, and we know how to move joy in people given our understanding of the psychology, right, the underlying psychology. I think that is so exciting to us and to people. In the last few minutes, can we pivot to employees and organizations?
Yeah, totally.
Because I don't think we have been sort of discussing Apex as more on the brand and the customer side, because that's the first market ready version we have out there right now. But we are currently working and have pretty much ready an employee internal facing engagement. So How do you think those two compare? How do they contrast? How are they different? General thoughts about employee engagement.
Yeah, I think I'm excited about getting in on the employee side. Again, I don't want to keep coming back to it, but if anything has really exposed a lot of what it means to be an employee at an organization, and what it means to be a happy employee at an organization, and what it means to be a committed employee at an organization. I think 2020 was just such an interesting case study for all of those things.
Mm-hmm.
And I've always been fascinated by why people are willing to donate, a third or more of their lives to something. And donating, you're getting paid for it, but still, at the end of the day, it's a massive commitment. Why that organization? Why that boss? Why that particular team or whichever within the organization? Why has that been the one to gain your interest in spending your time and putting in your efforts? And if you're not putting in your efforts, why? What's making you mail it in and whatever? So I think I've really wanted to understand this for a long time. I think we all have. At the end of the day, the premise that I think we're walking in on is we are people, whether we're got our work hats on, our family hats on, our friend hats on, or whatever. And so, do those 16 core elements change dramatically, or are they still the same? Is it true that I can only feel so many different emotions and they just sort of change in how they interrelate and the magnitude of them, but they're the same core sets? Or is there some difference? And then what are the predictive behaviors that are going to drive then things like absenteeism or things like commitment in the long term to an organization? So this is the piece where we're going through now. I know you and I have just done a very interesting piece of work to look at the numbers and test some hypotheses, and I'm exceptionally encouraged by what I see. Not just because I think we have found again that for the most part, people are people; those things don't change dramatically, but that we are actually tying it into a very strong set of academic literature around this, and what it means then if the behavior then is a long-term commitment to an organization, if the intended behavior anyways, what that means and how that actually manifests on the ground for organizations in terms of having a happier workforce, a workforce that is there, they're not absenteeism, and they're throwing in the extra weight when required. So I'm excited for that. The other reason why, and I'll just give me 10 more seconds and I'll wrap it up here. But
no, take your time.
The other thing I'm excited about with it is, to what extent are the things, now that we know that the 16 elements are pretty much close, we're going to do some more testing. I know we're not done, but we're in the right ballpark, I think. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. To what extent are the things that drive engagement for an organization internally mirrored the same or different than the ones that drive engagement for that same organization externally? And to what extent then is that an opportunity? To what extent is that a massive problem? Is there some misconception about the brand, either internally or externally, that we need to address? Are our customers for some reason not seeing the best of us the way our employees are? There's all these ways that we can now start making these really creative ties and engagement once you understand both external and internal for that same organization, and then how brands can go about deepening their relationships with everybody, with all their core audiences. So yeah, I'm excited to geek out on some data with you, to start pulling it all apart, because I think we're on the verge of something pretty special.
Yeah, agreed. And just given my background in the sort of organization and the employee engagement commitment side, I think on the practitioner side, in terms of audience engagement, are the listeners still there on this episode? We're near the end. So if half of those listeners who are still tuned in and engaged are on the academic side, our partnerships with some partnerships at Harvard Business School, and then also at UC Haas, we are sort of going out on an actual project to test employee engagement on the organization internally, and seeing how that relates, how it compares, how it contrasts to things like commitment, identification, and passion. So we're jumping into a full-fledged project on the academic side, and that's new and that's exciting and it's novel. But for the practitioners who are listening in, there's just a ton of really amazing and rich insights that can be pulled from the work that we will be embarking on over the next 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 months plus for the year 2021, as Emotive and as in Apex itself specifically continues to grow within the market. So I'm really excited to
There we go.
to have had you on. Nick just went away there for a coffee. I think he's back now.
Yeah.
Worked out perfectly. So I was just telling everybody about how, this exciting project that we're embarking on for the employee engagement side, and to stay tuned as we launch sort of headfirst into that specific Apex related project. But hey, Nick, where can people find us? Where can people find Apex and Emotive and you and the team?
Yeah, well, I think the best thing to do right now is go to apexscore.ai. Check out the new product. And I apologize for dropping off there. I think my internet told me to go take a coffee for 30 seconds there. I apologize. But apexscore.ai is where you're going to find what you need to know about the score, the tool, how we do it, find a little bit more out about Emotive and who we are. And just excited to keep going on this journey. I think it's on the verge of something pretty cool.
I'd say so. Yeah. Well, thanks so much, Nick. And
thank you, my friend. That was great.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll listeners, I'll link to all those pages and websites and all the other little bits of information we talked about. All right, Nick. For now, we'll talk soon.
Thank you.
Hey, Nick here once more. A final farewell note before ending. All the show notes, links to papers, resources, and materials mentioned in this episode can be found on the BS podcast page of The Behaviorist, where you can find all episodes and lots of other interesting and easy to apply sciencey stuff. Just head on over to www.behaviorist.biz/BS podcast. The show is edited and co-produced by Laura Christine and Noel Rain, and visual artwork, banners, and animated GIFs created by the talented Iris Deng of dengit.org. That's DENGIT.org. Definitely go and check it out. Lastly, if you'd like to join me in the mission of spreading the good BS word, remember to rate and review the show on iTunes or wherever else you get your podcast fix. Quite a bit of work goes into these episodes, and a little love would go a long way. Thanks again for listening. Until next time, remember, keep your facts ugly and your hypotheses beautiful.